Howdy, you delicious people. Of course, when I usually put together the last video of the day, usually the last video of the day always has some kind of problem. It's always the no-brainer of just, like, you go and you review the entire thing that you do, and then coincidentally at the last moment you lose the footage. You lose something. You have to go and edit the video or something. There's always some kind of problem. You lose power or something. Like, there's something that always has to be the last thing that I do for the day. But maybe I'll probably go on and do 2 other videos probably after this, so that we can kind of just get ahead of things. So technically the last video of this day, but I'll be doing other videos for other things. So, going into season 1, episode Trace or 3 of Yellowstone. So, it's kind of interesting the more that I go into this show, because we have like guys like Donnie Wahlberg who would go onto his social media and recommend this show to people. Like, I just so happen to be watching the show, and then Donnie Wahlberg of all people is to be recommending this show to people. I'm like, oh, what a coincidence, because I didn't think about, like, hey, are celebrities recommending this show to people? Maybe I should go and review this. No, it's just a coincidence. So Peacock evidently is to have this Yellowstone on right now, and you would think also Hulu would probably have it, but whatever. I can still watch it easily, but not everyone can. So I've recommended a number of apps through a number of things. If people are already having Peacock because they wanted to watch Halloween Kills anyways, then you get to watch Yellowstone. So, with that said, what is this episode about? Because I've taken 2 minutes and change to talk about other things. So, in this episode, the thing that I actually like this episode. Out of the 3 that I've watched, this is my kind of favorite one so far. Really, we have a flashback kind of solving a question for me. So, in this flashback, we have Evelyn Dutton, who, of course, we saw in the last episode as just a gravestone. Now we see Evelyn as a flashback, which is kind of nice to get some kind of context and whatever, and just understanding what exactly is going on in this show. And plus, also, I don't want to say exactly what happens with Evelyn, because this is cryptic-like sense. This is trying to avoid spoilers as much as possible. We also have some, again, for seemingly another time around, both Beth and Jamie are at each other's throats, literally in this episode, instead of just metaphorically, just kind of just talking things out, just kind of bickering back and forth between one another. Because Beth seems to be, specifically on the day of which that this is to be an episode, Beth is going through some struggle, and also so is John. And so it seems like these characters are going through some interesting things that we wouldn't have normally seen through any other episodes, seemingly. We also have Casey in this episode being some kind of cop who is not a cop for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. Like, he's just coming into a lot of scenarios and just being like Walker, Texas Ranger, for whatever freaking reason. I don't know why. But it just seems like he's consistently going into that pattern of things. Speaking of patterns, speaking of continuity, why do they have to have a younger John Dutton who is not played by Kevin Costner himself? Would they have thought that like some people would get confused of having like a Kevin Costner that looks the age that he is to do and be and whichever being in a flashback? Would people have gotten confused? I probably would have gotten equally confused if they recasted and have a completely different person being John Dutton in a flashback. But it's whatever, because me going on to IMDb going like, oh, that's younger John Dutton. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Even though I kind of figured that out regardless, because if anything, a photo is to probably be worth 1,000 words, correct? Maybe. So, with that said, yeah, I think that's all that I pretty much went into this one. We get some real, if things between John Dutton and Thomas Rainwater weren't on some bad terms, we really have this episode to kind of really cement that. It seems that Jamie is to see that there is to be a position to help out the ranch that is to be open. It seems that Jamie is going for it, but we'll see how that all turns out, especially with what's kind of going on with this episode, with seemingly both Beth and Jamie being at odds with one another, almost coming into blows, much more literally than metaphorically. So, with that said, yeah, I think that covers most of what I was to say about this cryptically. Barely. So let's go barely into much more spoiler talk. Let's go and wash this all out. If we don't have a scene in this episode, which I'm sure immediately there'd be a lot of tempting people that are just like, man, I definitely want to make that one scene a thumbnail of sorts. But then more than likely you would probably have that scene of a thumbnail that you would put together get removed. But it's like, man, that one scene would be really tempting to just have a thumbnail, but because heaven forbid, like thumbnails for YouTube videos, like you can barely show skin of females whatsoever. Like you're lucky to even have a thumbnail that has a female on it and it doesn't get removed. It's weird. I don't know what it is with YouTube and just like a female that has like a certain number of skin showing. It's just like, hey, remove that thumbnail. It looks suspicious. Okay, that makes no sense. But anyways, pushing on. So let's go to that double 5 time territory because it's about that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this episode. So I think I want to cover the Dutton family stuff, like the everybody at the ranch stuff, because the Casey things I think we're just gonna like leave that to the end because I feel like considering what is going on with Casey kind of finishes up the episode anyways. And plus it seems like there's a lot of stuff going on with everyone else compared to Casey, even though it seems like everyone's like fighting for real estate in this episode, but it seems Casey always has much more of a focus than anybody else in this family for whatever goofy reason. I don't know why there's so much of a focus of that character, and I'm sure any number of people would probably just say, "Oh well, yeah, we'll wait till blah 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 episode, or wait till blah 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 season, or wait till blah 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 thing." I'm sure. But hey, pushing on. So let's go into it. So, very beginning of this episode, let's cover the flashback. So here's my thing. So we have younger variations of these kids in the early part of this episode, and I'm a little confused exactly who exactly is who. Because it seems that we have a young version of Jamie and Beth, and I think at some point there was maybe somewhere on IMDb a young version of Casey somewhere, but yeah. Um, so I may not be sure who is Jamie or who is Casey. So I'm just gonna flip a coin here, and I'm assuming that this is going to be focused upon the young Jamie here, who is going with Beth, and I think Casey is probably off with some portion of whichever. Um, but so we'll get to that. So Evelyn, who is of course Beth, Casey, and Jamie's mother, of course, is to be going with her kids to go on horseback riding, where it seems that Beth is kind of struggling with her horse compared to everyone else. So Evelyn is just getting a little bit like antsy with Beth because she's kind of slow to the trot, so to speak. So Evelyn is like, come on, Beth, like the world's waiting for you, like hurry up." So Beth is getting irritated with her mother, so Beth just decides to like run alongside almost her mother, kind of brushing her mother's horse. Mother's horse ends up getting spooked, falls backwards, and falls on top of Evelyn and crushes her. So we have, I believe, young Jamie trying to console his mother and whatever, and just telling uh, hey, let me go and let me ride off to go and find someone that can help. And Evelyn's like, no, like I want Beth to go because Beth ended up putting me in this situation, so Beth is gonna go off and uh, find help. And so Beth, sadly, and I would probably be in the exact same position. Beth goes off, finds her father, but doesn't even know where they were to have ridden to. And so John is asking Beth, a younger, different John, is asking Beth, like, hey, like, where is your mother? And so Beth is like, I don't really know. So he's like, crap. So we have Evelyn, who is now, I guess, supposedly dead at this point. One kid is to be having a flashlight out. Coyotes are starting to surround this area because probably fresh blood of Evelyn, probably, sadly enough. And by the time that the one kid is to have this flashlight out, John is to arrive and find Evelyn dead and to find his son there. So that is the whole flashback of that. Finding out what ended up happening to the mother of this family and why she is to be dead. So John is to go on and is to spend the night with Governor Perry, and so it seems that Governor Perry is to put on this robe, and John is like, "Don't put on that robe. Like that's my wife's robe." So Governor Perry goes and just has this nightie on, and she's like, "Well, I wasn't gonna be wearing anything anyways." So Governor Perry and John go at it. We naturally assume. So the very next day, we have Jamie, who is screaming and yelling at some guy named Mike consistently about the attorney general position and how reasonably, this guy had been fired because of smoking embalming fluid and so on and so forth. So they're having this screaming match back and forth, yada yada yada. So while Jamie is to go talking to this guy, Beth in a robe is heading her way out to this watery trough outside with duo champagne bottles. And so Jamie's like, Mike, I'm going to have to let you go. Jamie goes off to see Beth, who is to seemingly disrobe. And here's the thing, like, Jamie was to do something with this trough, and not quite sure exactly what she tossed in there before she was to get in there. Because, like, I thought I saw, like, some weird goofy cord or something like that that she chucked in there. Like, was that to warm the water? I'm not sure. So, Beth has a robe on. Jamie's looking at her, just like, what are you doing? And so Beth is like, well, hey, uh, I'm gonna have to disrobe here, so you might want to look away unless you want to compare wangs or something, or want to compare like our private parts. Still, really, just saying that Jamie is still to be a guy who's gay for whatever reason. Like we're still pinging on that. So Jamie disrobes, or Jamie disrobes. Beth disrobes. Jamie looks away. Uh, and so Jamie is like, God, what's wrong with you now? Like, what? Like, God, you're just a pain. And so Jamie, I guess, is so busy with his business, he doesn't even realize what day it is. Beth has to remind him of that this is the anniversary of their mother's death. And Jamie's like, oh, I didn't even know. So Beth is to say that, like, not only like is she having to deal with this, like, not only that, but just imagine how John is going to have to forcibly deal with all this. And so Jamie eventually just gives up talking with Beth and then just walks off and just like, okay, just willy-nilly do whatever you want. So Rip, of course, comes over and is to go and give Beth his coat. And Beth walks out of this watery trough and is to just walk off without any kind of coat, clothes, or anything on. So, also before that happens, Governor Perry is to walk by and see whatever the heck that Beth is doing. And then she's like, okay, she's a loon. And then she walks off into her car. So, uh, so pushing on. So Jamie at one point is going to John and mentioning that it seems that there is a uh, attorney general position opening or open. And so Jamie, of course, wants it, and John is like, not right now, give me some time to think about it. And so Jamie's like, okay, like, but like I can start putting some things in place right now. And John's like, let me think about it. Go away. So John is to go and have Thomas Rainwater arrested, and so John is to meet up with Thomas Rainwater, who I guess had was going somewhere and wanting and was to put together some speech, and Thomas Rainwater was to drive off to make it to this this banquet or some meeting or some kind of place of sorts that has him go and put a tux on. to instead end up getting cuffs on because he's going to jail. So weirdly, we have John and Thomas Rainwater meeting in this spot where you would think like they would be like having these private like phone call conversations between one another between these walls, but no, we just have this like clear open area for both Thomas and John to talk and probably beat the crap out of one another, or maybe John, if John had a knife, probably stab Rainwater like, oh, hey, I didn't know any better. Because or Rainwater would have gone and maybe like beaten John. We don't know. Like, we could have speculated because it's an open area. It makes no sense. So John is to tell Thomas that, hey, like, give me back my cattle and you will no longer be arrested. I'll drop the charges. So give me back my cattle and this all goes away. So later in the episode, John is to get his cattle, and John is talking to the delivery guys and says, hey, that's what cowboys are for, because John is to evidently hire a bunch of people to handle all this cattle. Speaking of which, later on in the episode, Rip is to go on with a bunch of the workers and I guess their wives possibly, and they're going and doing this like tractor roping session where it seems like certain people are out of practice, but hey, like it's really difficult to rope up a cattle. But it seems like these characters might not be able to have anything to do in this episode, so at least they're giving them something to do. And plus, also, they're having fun in the episode, which is another plus. So, so pushing on. So we get to a spot where John is just kind of uh, sitting in the stable, and so Jimmy, and this is kind of later on in at night, and Jimmy's kind of going and making sure all the stable doors are all locked up, and then Jimmy all of a sudden sees John there, and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Like, should I leave you be?" And so John stops Jimmy. He's like, "Well, hey, uh, like Jimmy got any family left?" And Jimmy is to mention that uh, like he only has a grandfather, but most of his family is to either be arrested or dead. So, so John asked Jimmy about his grandmother, and Jimmy's because John didn't really know his grandmother, and so Jimmy said, "Yeah, like his grandfather talked that supposedly, I guess, when the grandmother died, like it basically killed the rest of the family." And so John is to say, it's like, well, yeah, I guess uh, my family is all dying off, but it's just happening slower. It's like, wow, that's brutal. So Jimmy walks off and is like, well, I guess there's nothing I can say about that. And so John falls asleep in the stable, and then he wakes up when I guess the cattle is to be there, and kind of tells him like, yeah, that's what cowboys are for. So, so now let's go to the whole Beth Jamie situation. So after John is to go and talk to Rainwater, it seemed that John is starting to hustle and bustle and start to get some people who can possibly get onto the campaign trail for some attorney general kind of situations. And so John is bringing these people in to talk to Beth, but it seems that more or less John is going to go and talk to all these guys to possibly either help Jamie or help Beth or both. because John is to talk to Beth and say, hey, yeah, you're running alongside your brother, so that way there is no one else that's going to run against them, and so it's a win-win for John. So either one of them are going to eventually be this position. So both Beth and Jamie are to be by themselves after this whole talk of these guys and whatever. And so Jamie goes on that uh, like he starts talking about cancer and how basically cancer is to be a strange form of suicide, because supposedly not only cancer is to try and kill its host, which eventually kills itself. It's like that is such a bizarre thing. And so Jamie goes and turns to Beth and says like, yeah, like you're just like a cancer. And Beth is just like, both Beth and Jamie just start getting more and more brutal back and forth talking. And so Jamie and Beth pull off to the side to go into this barn to just talk more. But Beth just finally wants to just beat the out of her brother, punching him multiple times. And so Beth is telling Jamie to punch back. And so finally he does punch her and she falls over. And he is to say, like, oh, well, am I a man now because I punched you? And she says, like, the more manly thing that you should have done would have been walking away. It's like either way, like Jamie can't win against Beth, because Beth is always going to have this one-upsmanship thing and always continue to get back at Jamie for being a wussy or a girl, or questioning whether he's gay or not, or some other goofy thing that they keep going over and over and over again with between these two, which leads into these trading of blows. So later on, uh, Jamie is to go and talk with John and say, like, hey, I don't need your acceptance to go and run for this attorney general job. Like, it's actually the best for both worlds, for like the ranch and for me. And so John is like, well, yeah, I get that. Like, and I think it's a good choice for you to go there and do that. So they can have supposedly control of things. So, but John is to also say, and if you ever punch your sister again, your head's going through a wall. So there's also to be the one point when Beth is to tell Jamie while they were fighting that Jamie only tries to do everything that is to be good for himself, and that when her father ends up dying, Beth is going to sell all of her stock to some Four Seasons restaurant and go and swim in one of their massive pools that they have. And it's just like, man, like Beth is just like getting really brutal at this point in this episode, but it's so interesting. So now I think that I've covered most of the Dutton family stuff. I think there might have been something that slipped through the cracks there, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and I didn't even get to like most of the dialogues there. But it is what it is. So now let's just get to the Casey stuff to just kind of like quickly, hopefully, wrap this up and get it within a decent time, because I think this episode is like 48 minutes long, and maybe I probably might go into double episodes to just kind of cover more ground, because we're having 3 seasons of stuff, but it seems like people are really interested in the first season compared to anything else. So we'll see how this all ends up with people's interest. I don't know. So, because the first episode could be a huge banner of a thing, people love it and whatever, but then when you get further on into something, people lose interest because stuff happens. Um, but that's okay, because freaking, if I enjoy a show, then like if you want to watch the reviews, that's okay. It's all right. Um, just enjoy the show. That's all I say. Just enjoy it. So let's cover the Casey stuff. So Casey is to seemingly be Rent-A-Cop without the actual cop part of it. So I think the way we introduce this character in this episode is him driving off with Tate. And so Tate is to confirm with his father that the call he was to have called in the last episode was to re-sign up for the army. And Tate is like, I don't want you to go to the army. And Casey's like, well, bills have to get paid. Tate starts crying. Casey is to just be like, hey, I don't want to go back to the military either. Like, I just don't. But it seems like he can't go and do anything anywhere else. Like, is he eventually going to go and work with his dad on the ranch to get? Does that seem to be the easiest way out? But it also seems that Casey is to seemingly get in way too much trouble. It seems like Casey is kind of getting over his head. Uh, and I'm assuming that Casey even might end up in jail at some point with kind of what's going on for every one of these episodes. So, uh, so Casey is to go on and see this kind of van weirdly parked at this one spot. Casey decides to go off and see why this van is to be there. All of a sudden, seeing some guy with a Breaking Bad looking costume on, with a gas mask and kind of a white outfit on, or white getup on, and so Casey goes and shoots up this guy because he whips a gun out, and so this van starts driving off, and so Casey goes and grabs Tate and puts him in this metal tube and tells him to just stay there. And so Casey starts driving after this van. The van driver ends up getting in an accident, forcing him to run off. And so now we have Casey and this guy running off in the middle of the desert. Casey ends up having, weirdly, this rope, coincidentally, where he goes and ropes up this one guy, grabs him by the legs, and so the guy ends up going and falling over and coincidentally smacks dab on the only rock that I guess is to be in this desert. Conveniently. Having this guy just die off so that way Casey doesn't have to fire a shot. So Casey goes back to the van to find a girl named Daisy there. And so, of course, Casey is to ask Daisy if she's okay, because there's technically blood on her face. So it seems that Daisy doesn't want to talk about anything, doesn't want to say what happened, nothing. So we just have Casey who brings Daisy back to her home, where Casey talks to her father Danny about like kind of what are they gonna do, like what is the thought process of Daisy. Is Daisy's father Danny going to convince Daisy to turn these guys in or to call the police or whichever? Daisy's not going to do anything, so they're basically right back to where they are. But Danny's like, well, I have a plan. And so Casey's like, well, let me go and drive back my bloodied up son back home, and then we'll kind of deal with this. Because while Tate was to be in this metal tube, there was to be a rattlesnake that was in this metal tube. Tate kind of takes his boot against this rattlesnake and ends up killing it, and goes and like shows his dad that he killed this rattlesnake. And so Casey goes and cuts the rattle part and gives it to his son. Of like, yeah, that's your first ever like you killing the snake. I'm like, okay, that's so weird. So Casey goes and takes Tate home, and Monica is seeing Tate covered in blood. She's like, what the heck happened to him? And Casey's just like, well, he just needs a bath. Like, don't ask him what happened. Like, I'll tell you what happened when I get home. And so Monica's like, really? That's all you're telling me? And he's like, yep. Like, I'll see you later. So Casey goes off and with Danny and a couple other guys. And so they dig a hole to toss these bodies in, but then they light it on fire afterwards. And so Casey's like, well, what was the whole point of digging the hole if we're gonna just burn these guys? And so it's like, well, they want to supposedly trap the souls, so that way they can't go to hell or to heaven, and that's the whole reason for why they're doing that. So it seems that Casey's to burn these bodies, and so they go and dig up, they kind of bury the bodies, and so we weirdly later on have some company going in, I guess, building some building by this spot, coincidentally where these bodies are buried. And so we have this person measuring for exact how much space they're gonna use. And conveniently they're going right where the bodies are. And I'm like, oh, so are these bodies gonna coincidentally get digged up and somebody's going to go to jail for this? Somebody's going to go to prison for this? Is Casey going to get involved? Is someone going to squeal? Blah, 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 blah. So we'll see how this all like turns out. Maybe it'll be the fact that nothing was recovered. Who knows? So with that said, I think I've covered everything, but maybe something slipped through the cracks. I probably rushed through this, probably much more so than I probably would have originally, but I think everything feels covered. So, with that said, if there's something that I didn't cover, I apologize, but otherwise, I'm also going to get the heck out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.